Putin has been waging war on Ukraine for years and trying to occupy it. He was trying to take the entire Ukrainian territory under Russian rule. However, Putin faced a great power after this war he started. Putin's previous invasion attempts in 2014 and the Ukrainian armed forces had been in great preparation since then. Most of the Ukrainian soldiers received special military training in the US and participated in all kinds of exercises. They were prepared for any possible attack from Russia. This preparation gave the Ukrainian army a great strength. On February 24th, they took a primarily defensive position against the Russian army, which began its invasion attempt. Only by withdrawing from relatively minor towns and evacuating Ukrainian citizens did they allow the Russian army to occupy those areas. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian army continued its preparations. It knew all the ways in and out of the areas that the Russian armies were allowed to occupy. Several months were spent in a defensive position, waiting for the Russian troops to get tired. The last months of the war were characterized by Ukrainian military operations. The Ukrainian armed forces, supported by their allies, have gone on full offensive and are not letting the Russian armies raise their heads. The fact that Putin's armies are constantly losing has turned the spotlight on Putin. Opposition officials in the Kremlin have been reacting to Putin for months. Now even the people who were with Putin started to react. There are tense moments in the Kremlin. Putin's losses to his country angered the Kremlin officials. The Russian people have been expressing their reactions against Putin for months. Government officials in the Kremlin demanded an emergency meeting to criticize Putin's wrong decisions in recent days. The meeting was attended by members of the Russian parliament, deputies, and leaders of parties opposing Putin. It was a tense meeting and there were many discussions. Some argued that Russia should end the war and repatriate Russian troops before they inflict more casualties on their country. Others argued that Russia was not weak enough to give up the war, but that Putin's management of the war had failed, so Putin should leave the government. Putin reacted harshly to the harsh criticism against him. After mutual discussions, a fight broke out between opposition parties and Putin. Both Kremlin officials and a large part of the Russian people think that Putin has failed to manage this war. Never before in history has such a defeat been seen. Never before has a state that launched an invasion attempt by attacking a smaller and weaker country suffered much a defeat. It was Putin himself who started this war and led his country to a major collapse. Putin's failure has been exposed once again. He has started to evacuate his troops from 4 regions in Ukraine, which he declared annexed about a month ago. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry announced last week that Kherson, one of the 4 regions that Putin claimed to have annexed, was completely under the control of the Ukrainian army. This week, the Ukrainian Defense Ministry had not yet made a statement about the annexed regions, but new information came from Russia. It was learned that Putin evacuated his soldiers. Putin, who could not cope with the intensive operations of the Ukrainian armies in the regions he declared annexed, asked his surviving soldiers to form a defense line on the border. Ukraine's progress in the region after the full offensive shows that the war is moving towards Russia. Putin started to gather his troops in the border region because he was afraid of this situation. But Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky seems determined. After the attack on the capital city of Kiev in the past weeks, Zelensky was furious. He said that this attack was a turning point for Ukraine and that they started a counterattack with full force. He promised that there would be no more attacks on the capital Kiev and he would do everything in his power to expel Russian troops from the country as soon as possible. Zelensky's decisive stance had an impact on the Ukrainian armies. Over the last 3 weeks, the Ukrainian armed forces have carried out high-level operations. In many cities, they have forced the withdrawal of Russian troops. Russian soldiers started to flee back to Russian territory without looking back. Putin, on the other hand, does not want to give up the war and wants all withdrawn troops to form a new line on the border. In addition, the fact that Putin is evacuating his troops from the annexed territories shows Russia's weakness. Putin's inability to stand behind his decisions weakens his control over the army. Russian soldiers used to be very afraid of Putin. Now even the commanders have started not to fulfill Putin's orders. This is why Putin announced the evacuation order. Commanders ordered their troops to withdraw from the annexed territories without Putin's orders. Putin, on the other hand, decided to evacuate so that it would not be noticed that his orders were not listened, and tried to create the perception that they were withdrawn on his orders. One of the last regions occupied by the Russian armies was the city of Melitopol. However, after the intensive operations of the heroic Ukrainian army in recent months, new successes have been added. Ukrainian armed forces are trying to push back the Russian troops with intense pressure in the Melitopol region. Many villages in the surrounding areas of the city of Melitopol have been cleared of Russian soldiers. On the one hand, the Ukrainian army started mine clearance operations in those villages. With superior minesweepers from the United States, the entire region is being checked, and when the entire region is completely under control and cleared, citizens are allowed to move to their homes. Melitopol has been under occupation for months. That is why the Russian armies have established many military bases in the city. The Ukrainian Air Force is conducting operations against Russian military bases with the Turkish-made Bayraktar TB2, which is not caught by Russian radars. The mayor of Melitopol, despite being under occupation, has not given up his resistance against the Russians. He still maintains his presence in the city and provides intelligence to the Ukrainian army, and provides information about the occupiers in the city. The mayor of Melitopol announced last night that the last Russian headquarters in the region was destroyed by the Ukrainian armed forces. With this operation, Putin lost his last headquarters in that region, stating that they have been providing support to the Ukrainian soldiers in the city for months, and expressing how much resistance the Ukrainian soldiers have shown for Melitopol. The mayor said that the city will soon be completely liberated. He also called on Russia and Putin to end the war and return to their country. Not only Ukrainians, but also the Russian people, military experts, war analysts and officials from many countries say that this war should not be prolonged any longer. Putin, on the other hand, realizing that he cannot win, is trying to play all his ammunition and all his trump cards to see how much damage he can inflict on Ukraine. However, Ukraine's superior defense force prevents harm to the region and citizens.